A Europe-wide manhunt for the suspect in the Berlin lorry attack and difficult questions for German police. Tunisian Anis Amri is a rejected asylum seeker who had already been investigated by counter-terrorism officers. He'd been under surveillance 2 months before the attack, but it was stopped for lack of evidence.
This person attracted the attention of several security services in Germany through his contact with a radical Islamist.
Details of the injured and those killed in the Christmas market are beginning to emerge. And in a terrible irony, the paperwork needed to deport the man suspected of murdering them was completed just today. Also tonight, the NHS in England defends planned hospital closures. Critics say they're just cuts. Life for the millionaire who murdered his escort girlfriend. He told the police what happened.
Once I sort of attempted to murder her, I've been in a hell of a lot of trouble for that, and she could have still gone on and blackmailed me.
The first black Church of England bishop in 20 years as it's accused of institutional racism. And the class of 2024, Team GB looks ahead after its record-breaking performance in Rio.
In the South, jailed after trying to sell powerful guns and explosives he'd stolen from his Royal Marines base in Dorset. And why this man's conviction for drug smuggling 5 years ago could now cost his family their home.
Good evening. A Europe-wide manhunt is underway for a rejected asylum seeker suspected of driving the lorry that ploughed into a Christmas market in Berlin. He is 24-year-old Anis Amri from Tunisia. It's emerged he'd already been under investigation by counter-terrorism police for planning a possible attack as recently as September, but covert surveillance was stopped for lack of evidence. He was due to be deported from Germany back in August, but the documentation needed to send him back to Tunisia only arrived today. Our Berlin correspondent Jenny Hill has the latest.
You're looking at Europe's most wanted man, Anis Amri, the only suspect in the investigation into an attack which shattered Germany. Prosecutors warn he may be armed, dangerous, and they're offering a €100,000 reward.
There's a new suspect. We are searching for him. We'll keep investigating every lead. We issued a warrant for this suspect's arrest at midnight. The warrant covers the whole of Germany and most of Europe.
We're learning more about the 24-year-old Tunisian. He arrived in Germany last year. He was refused asylum, but granted temporary leave to stay. The security services admit he was known to them, considered a threat because of his links to one of Germany's most notorious Islamist networks. And he'll be hard to find. He used 6 different names and 3 nationalities.
This person attracted the attention of several security services in Germany through his contact with a radical Islamist.
The hijacked lorry is yielding grim evidence. Documents leading to the suspect and DNA. It's thought Amri fought with the man who should have been behind the wheel before shooting him dead. But it was 24 hours before police identified him as a suspect. First, they arrested and released an innocent man, giving Amri a vital head start. Today, flowers for the dead, prayers for the injured. The German foreign minister was joined at the scene of the attack by his Italian counterpart. Among those missing and feared dead, Fabrizia Di Lorenzo, who comes from L'Aquila. Dalia El-Kayam, who's from Israel, also hasn't been seen since the attack. Her husband Rami is seriously ill in hospital. A time perhaps for faith. Tonight, a spontaneous gathering at a Berlin synagogue.
The ceremony was extremely important because this attack was not an attack on Berlin or on Germany. It was not an attack on Jews or on Christians. This was an attack on all of us.
Across the city, a vigil of a different kind. The attack the arrest warrant have reignited a national debate. The anti-immigrant party Alternative für Deutschland blame Angela Merkel and her refugee policy for this attack. So does Geert Wilders. The far-right Dutch politician posted this picture today, the German Chancellor's hands covered in blood.
Do you blame Angela Merkel for what happened?
Angela Merkel ist eine sehr humanistisch denkende Frau.
Angela Merkel, she says, is a humanitarian woman. She did the right thing a year ago. No one could know this would happen.
We are a free world, and if we want to stay free, things like this will happen.
This country feels nervous. Extra security for Christmas markets. After all, Anne-Marie is still at large. But this investigation does now have a face and a focus. For some here, a little light perhaps, in the darkness.
Well, let's go live to Berlin and talk to Jenny Hill, who's there for us now. Jenny, as far as this main suspect is concerned, Anis Amri and the German police, there seem to have been a number of missed opportunities.
That's correct. I think we are starting to get more of a picture of his background. He reportedly spent, for example, some time in prison in Italy. He appears to have had a history of violent offending. He may, we're told, have been arrested at least once here in Germany. Let me bring you up to speed, actually, because we have had a couple of unconfirmed reports here tonight that counter-terror officers have stormed 2 apartments here in Berlin, although they've made no arrests. The truth is, tonight, this man is still at large. He could be anywhere in Germany, anywhere in Europe. This warrant actually extends to the whole of the passport-free Schengen zone. So tonight, I think here, there really is a sense of course, grief, anger, frustration, but above all, there is really very much a sense of unease too.
Jenny Hill in Berlin, thank you. Well, in response to the Berlin attack, new security measures that were already planned around Buckingham Palace have been brought forward. From today, surrounding roads are being closed during the changing of the guard. The UK remains on its second highest threat level of severe, meaning an attack is considered highly likely, as our security correspondent Frank Gardner reports.
A normal morning at Buckingham Palace for the changing of the guard. Not quite. Extra armed police have been deployed at public events like this since the terrorist attack in Berlin. Plans to close off the surrounding roads have been brought forward to prevent a lorry being driven into the crowd. The public seemed reassured.
Well, we spoke about it, but you can't let them win, can you? So everybody's here today, I suppose, is in support of what's happened out there.
Safe. Yeah, because the policemen are everywhere.
But there's a limit to what the police alone can stop. MI5, the security service, is currently monitoring around 3,000 extremists on their databases. 400 more are still in Syria.
The biggest challenge is that we have in this country a number of violent extremists, any one of whom could decide on the spur of the moment to conduct some terrorist act. So the authorities have got to keep track of a lot of people, put the jigsaw puzzle together, and then deploy their resources where they think the risks are greatest.
On the continent, Germany, long a reluctant user of CCTV, is now edging closer to the British model of widespread video surveillance of public places. International Intelligence Corporation has stopped some attacks, but the simpler the plot, the harder it is to detect. Getting spies inside terrorist networks overseas is what MI6, the Secret Intelligence Service, does. Over here in Britain, it's MI5's job. But increasingly these days, jihadists are looking for low-tech ways of inflicting maximum casualties with the minimum chances of their plans leaking out. Today, the government's efforts to monitor people's private communications were dealt a blow. The European Court of Justice ruled against the indiscriminate bulk collection of data, except in cases of serious crime. The ruling, which the government is appealing against, was hailed by Labour's Tom Watson and others, who said it proved the government had overstepped the mark. Some disagree.
I think it's going to make it more difficult, not only the fight against terror, but the fight against organised crime, sexual exploitation, even things like looking for missing persons. Criminals are often very careful in the days immediately before their crime about who they talk to on the phone. That's why it can be very useful to go back into the records for a few weeks or a few months and see who they were speaking to then.
Efforts to keep the public safe from a terrorist attack are starting to look like a war without end. Britain may have the tools to fight it, but it is not impregnable. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
The medical director of the NHS in England, Sir Bruce Keogh, has defended controversial plans to radically change how health services are delivered in England. The proposals would result in the closure of some accident and emergency units and hospital wards, as services are concentrated at fewer sites. Critics say it's just cost-cutting. This report from our health editor, Hugh Pym.
With threats to local hospitals, queue protesters, and that's what's happening here in Banbury.
Hands off the horses!
They fear NHS reform plans will mean the local A&E being downgraded with longer journeys to Oxford. Local managers say nothing's finalised, but with maternity services recently reduced, these demonstrators claim there's more to come.
We need a hospital that is going to support the population of Banbury, and I feel that reducing the services of Banbury and forcing people to go elsewhere is going to put lives at risk.
I want the Horton to stay as it is and to grow, really, not to shrink, to get better and bigger.
It's just one example of sustainability and transformation plans being drawn up in every area of England, with local health and social care leaders urged to do more to look after people away from hospitals.
Campaigners out trying to protect local hospital services is nothing new in NHS politics. The question is whether protests like this become more widespread. NHS leaders know they have to work hard to convince the public that changes could benefit patients.
It's incumbent on those who are putting the proposals forwards to be absolutely clear about what the benefits and risks of each proposed change are, because many communities will have some pretty difficult choices to make.
What would you say to those who say this is a smokescreen for cuts and there's a hidden agenda?
Well, there will always be people that think that. But actually, this is really about a proper conversation about how we improve the services, and in particular, how we link up social care and the National Health Service.
Some of the plans draw on a pioneering scheme which is being tried out in areas like Margate. Known as Primary Care Home, it sees GPs, the NHS and social care looking after patients together.
How are you?
I'm a lot better compared to I was, darling.
Yeah?
Barbara, who has heart, lung and kidney problems, has visits whenever she needs them so she can live in her own home.
The doctors come in, nurses, and then the carers come in and say to me, the team is absolutely marvellous. I recommend being at home to get better rather than being in hospital.
Northern Ireland and Scotland already have integrated health and social care. The landscape's the same across the UK, with an ageing population and stretched budgets. England's attempts to join up local services offers opportunities, but it won't be plain sailing. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
A former Royal Marine Sergeant who's serving a life sentence for murdering a wounded Afghan fighter in 2011 has been refused bail while he awaits an appeal hearing. The family of Alexander Blackman had hoped he'd be released from custody in time for Christmas. His case is due to be reconsidered next year. A millionaire property developer from South Wales has been jailed for life for the murder of his escort girlfriend. Peter Morgan strangled Georgina Simmons, who he paid £10,000 a month, at her home in Newport. He had admitted killing her, but denied it was murder. Sian Lloyd reports.
Georgina Simmons, mother to a 5-year-old daughter. She was strangled by the man who called himself her sugar daddy. The 25-year-old had met property millionaire Peter Morgan while working as an escort. The married 54-year-old had become infatuated with her. But the court heard he killed her in a carefully planned attack out of cold anger on finding out that she planned to blackmail him. In a statement read on her behalf, Georgina Simmons' mother Deborah said their family was broken.
The death of my daughter Georgina Simmons has been a devastating tragedy for the whole of our family. Her beautiful daughter has been left without a mum.
Georgina has left a hole in our lives that will never be repaired.
During their relationship, the father of two had paid Georgina Simmons up to £10,000 a month, taken her on helicopter flights and bought expensive gifts. She moved into a bungalow in the grounds of a ruined mansion that he owned, but she didn't know that he'd installed a listening device disguised as a plug adapter. The multimillionaire overheard a conversation in which she spoke of plans to blackmail him by threatening to send intimate pictures to his family. Police visited her bungalow when she was reported missing after failing to pick up her daughter from school. This body cam footage records Morgan claiming that he didn't know where she was.
Where do we think she was going at 12 o'clock?
Didn't say. She didn't say. She just wanted me gone by 12.
But Georgina Simmons was already dead. Peter Morgan had concealed her body in a barn at his family home. This was the moment that Peter Morgan told police officers what he'd done.
The trouble was, once I sort of attempted to murder her, I'd been in a hell of a lot of trouble for that, and she could have still gone on and blackmailed me, couldn't she?
During his trial, the jury had been told that Peter Morgan had Asperger's syndrome. He had denied murder on the grounds of diminished responsibility. But the judge told him that the plans that he had made and the steps he'd taken to cover up what he'd done showed that he was in control and understood his actions. Peter Morgan showed no emotion as he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years for the murder of Georgina Simmons. Sian Lloyd, BBC News, Newport Crown Court.
Let's take a brief look at some of the day's other news stories. In Syria, the operation to bring the remaining residents out of the formerly rebel-held areas of eastern Aleppo has resumed after a 24-hour pause. There have been reports saying all rebel fighters are now out, but the US State Department says that's not yet clear. Syrian army units are waiting to take full control of the city after 4 years of intense fighting. A Labour MP who's been an outspoken critic of his leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has announced he's standing down from Parliament. Jamie Reid, who represents Copeland in West Cumbria, is taking a job at the Sellafield nuclear plant. The resulting by-election is expected to be difficult for Labour, as it only won the seat narrowly in 2015 and its constituents voted heavily for Brexit. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh have delayed plans to go to Sandringham, where they'll spend Christmas with the rest of the royal family, because they both have heavy colds. They had been due to travel by train to Norfolk today. They're now expected to go tomorrow or Friday. The CBI has called for UK firms to continue to enjoy tariff-free access to European markets post-Brexit, after conducting the largest consultation of its members since the EU referendum. It's published a report urging the government to negotiate for the whole economy rather than individual sectors. Our business editor Simon Jack explains.
The very different faces of the UK economy, each making their own different contribution. In pure economic terms, there is a country mile between them. Farming adds £9 billion to the value of the economy. Finance, a whopping £120 billion.
Inherently, I'm very optimistic.
Their priorities when it comes to Brexit,
we're producing some fantastic products.
Also very, very different.
We could very easily end up sleepwalking into a situation where we have very high tariffs. And if those tariffs are there even for short periods of time, I take you back to the foot and mouth outbreak in 2007, where we lost our exports. That cost the industry about 25% of the value of the sheep market.
Is it passporting? Meanwhile, in the city, different worries for an industry that packs a big economic punch.
2.2 million jobs across the UK, 2/3 outside of London, the biggest taxpayer, the biggest exporting sector, and the biggest attractor of inward investment into the UK. It's a really important industry and an asset for the UK.
When there is so much to work through, so much detail to negotiate, and the stakes are so very high, it is perhaps understandable to prioritise the industries that deliver the big bucks. But that would be a mistake, according to the CBI.
Across a wide variety of sectors, there are three things that are common to all. The first is tariff-free access to the European market. The second is access to people and skills, the vital ingredient in every business. And third, and really important, is continuity and stability around rules and regulations.
That last point is a big one for industries like aerospace. Collective standards are set in Europe because of the cost and complexity of the products. Duplicating that in the UK would be expensive.
Not being a member of the European Aviation Safety Agency would cost the UK government up to £40 million per annum. It would add unnecessary administrative burden to industry and potentially minimise or make it more difficult for us to export to key markets around the world.
Business is committed to making Brexit a success. To achieve that, say the CBI, we'll need an approach that works for all industries. Simon Jack, BBC News. 2016 has seen a series of tough challenges for the European Union, with the vote for Brexit, the rise of nationalist parties and the continuing migrant crisis. In the third of a series on how the world has changed over the last year, our special correspondent Alan Little considers what impact the momentous political changes in the UK and America might have on Europe.
In Prague, the Christmas markets are glittering symbols of a remarkable transition. From dictatorship, foreign occupation and poverty to one of the fastest growing economies in the EU. The country's wealth has more than quadrupled in a generation. The anti-communist revolutions of 1989 changed the shape of Europe. Somewhere in this crowd of 400,000 is a much younger me, watching as the dissident playwright Václav Havel gave voice to the hopes of half a continent.
It was a really thrilling thing to stand here beneath that balcony and watch an entire nation rise up to take back control of its own destiny. It wasn't just about democratic transition. At the heart of that revolution lay the idea that they were returning their country to where it properly belonged, to the heart of Europe.
Is it still so? Some here now argue that having taken control of their national destiny from Moscow, the former communist states then gave it away again to Brussels.
To speak about independence is a joke. We wanted to be integrated in the EU, but not unified. I think that the role of the national government is now rather limited. Most of the decisions come from Brussels, not from Prague here. So this is not independence.
The former communist bloc has its own Rust Belt. This steel factory outside Prague collapsed under market forces. Its workforce fell from 20,000 to 300. But openness to Europe has given the Czech economy far more than it has taken away. It has one of the lowest unemployment rates in Europe. There is, even in this dereliction, little appetite to walk away from that success story.
I think most people would vote to stay in the EU. At least I would. I look at my family, and I think for the sake of my children and grandchildren, for their future, it's better to be in the EU.
Germany is Europe's centre of gravity now. Pianos from this factory sell around the world because they're among the best in the world, and that is Germany's economic strength. The pursuit of unity in Europe has been Germany's way of turning the page on its own dark past. The EU has been Germany's act of contrition and of redemption. The pianist Salim Ashkar is a Palestinian now settled in Berlin.
What I do see is a country here that has been traumatized by its past, and as a result has become extremely thoughtful about politics. In a way, Germany has used its traumatic past for the good, and it is now a very, you say in German, nüchtern, very awakened. It's not sleepwalking anywhere, or very careful of sleepwalking.
2016 has given Germany a new responsibility, one it did not seek: how to lead in Europe without rousing the ghosts of German domination in Europe.
Germans are incredibly neurotic about world leadership, or even about European leadership. They don't like to think of themselves really having a foreign policy. So, the idea that Germany would somehow lead is very disturbing for many Germans. And so no, I don't think they're prepared for this moment well at all, although things in Germany are changing, and there's beginning to be slowly a sense that, if we don't do it, nobody will.
For 70 years, leadership of the West has been English-speaking. 2016 has upended that assumption. Now Germany, as it grapples with a security crisis of its own, finds the burden of leadership thrust upon it. Alan Little, BBC News, Berlin.
And you can see a longer version of Alan Little's reports this week on Our World this weekend on the BBC News channel. It's on Friday and Sunday evening at 9:30 and Sunday at 10:30. A senior black clergywoman has accused the Church of England of institutional racism because it has so few ethnic minorities in its highest ranks. There are only 6 black, Asian and minority ethnic clergy at the highest levels of the Church, despite black evangelical churches becoming more popular. The Church has acknowledged there's a problem, as our religious affairs correspondent Martin Bashir reports.
Praise the Lord.
The Reverend Tunde Roberts has been leading a growing and diverse congregation for the last 17 years and cannot understand why ethnic minorities can fill the pews and pulpits of the Church of England, but not senior leadership positions.
What is it about being a bishop that we cannot do? What is different?
Brilliant. We'll look forward to the appointment of Caraway Dorgu yesterday as Bishop of Woolwich has been welcomed, but does little to improve statistics. Of 41 dioceses, there is only one black, Asian or minority ethnic bishop, John Sentamu, the Archbishop of York. And he's one of just 5 minority ethnic clergy to hold senior positions in the entire Church of England. Rose Hudson Wilkin serves at the centre of the nation's democracy as chaplain to the Speaker of the House of Commons. She's also one of the most prominent black members of the clergy.
I do not believe that the Church respects and embraces its minority ethnic membership.
When you describe the Church as not respecting people of colour, of being visible and invisible, are you not describing the essential elements of institutional racism?
I suspect that I am. I suspect that I am. It's a heavy burden. It is really a heavy burden to say that, because that is the church that I belong to. That is the church that I love.
Clearly there have been issues about development, about people being given the opportunities to take on those posts which are stepping stone posts to senior appointments, and I'm almost certain, though one can't prove these things, that there must have been bias of some kind within the appointments processes in past years.
The growth of ethnically diverse churches means they're unlikely to be so patient if forced to wait 20 more years for another black bishop. Martin Bashir, BBC News.
It was one of the highlights of the year. Team GB's record-breaking performance in Rio delivered gold medal after gold medal and will live long in the memory of sports fans. Now, Team GB's bosses are looking ahead, not just to 2020. They're already working with the athletes of 2024. Our sports correspondent Natalie Perks has been to meet some of them.
It was a summer of unprecedented sporting success. Golds were boldly won where golds haven't been won before.
Oh, sensational!
Never before had a nation exceeded their medal tally at a Summer Olympics immediately after a home games.
Adam Peaty takes Olympic gold for Great Britain.
Tokyo has a lot to live up to. But future stars are already on the springboard, and not just for 2020. UK Sport was unique when it launched its 8-year pathway programme. Not only does it invest in athletes with what it calls podium potential for the next Olympics, but also for the athletes coming up behind them, like diver Kat Torrance. With 2 golds at the recent World Junior Championships, she's an Olympic hopeful, learning her trade alongside Olympic champions.
An Olympic medal, a gold one from Team GB, had never happened, so it did almost seem impossible, but now that they've done it, it's like, okay, maybe it's not impossible. Maybe it could be repeated in the next Olympics. So, you know, they're a big inspiration to us.
It's kind of weird to think that we are role models for them. But I think that they were hugely inspired by, you know, watching the Olympics and seeing the success that we got.
Yeah. So we've got such talent just here, and it's young talent as well, which is really exciting. So, you know, looking forward to 2020 and onwards, it's going to be amazing.
Another sport to exceed expectations in Rio with 7 medals was gymnastics.
Everybody's looked at gymnastics in Britain and thought, well, no, London was going to be a fluke.
and then it would drop off the cliff. We set out to make sure that that was sustainable going through to Rio, and in the same ways now we expect that to be sustainable going on to Tokyo and beyond to 2024.
One of the gymnasts on the 8-year pathway is 16-year-old Jamie Lewis. He's part of Great Britain's juniors, who this year won their 5th European team gold in a row.
The ultimate dream, to win an all-around medal at the Olympic Games in at least 2024, or a medal at Tokyo in 2020.
Do you think 2024 is more realistic?
Yes. Yes, so I think so.
2020 is a dream, and 2024 is reality.
Yes.
You're that confident?
Yeah.
Wow.
With confidence like that, it seems Britain's future medal prospects remain bright. Natalie Perks, BBC News.
That's all from us. There'll be more on all those stories, and of course any updates on the manhunt for the suspect in the Berlin attack over on the BBC News channel. But here on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Bye-bye.